Hi, this is Rick for EDU Mobile, and welcome to this course in Android development. We're going to talk about developing mobile applications on Android devices using Java. So let's get started. In this course, we'll teach you how to develop mobile apps on Android devices, tablets, and phones using Java and the Android Studio. I'm assuming that you have some familiarity with Java, some basic familiarity. Some of the more advanced concepts you may not be familiar with. That's okay, we'll cover them as we go. But some basic familiarity with Java is required for this course. You will also need the Java Developer Kit. The JDK is available for free at this link, and you'll need to make sure that you choose the JDK button. And unless you're developing for NetBeans, don't go ahead and get that NetBeans piece, but just the basic JDK, but get the latest version for your operating system. And that will get you Java. The next step, of course, is to get an IDE, an integrated development environment that will allow you to develop for the Android platform. So you will need to navigate your browser to developer.android.com and then either click or just use this entire link and use Tools Index. There are two versions of the IDE available. The first one is called the ADT Bundle. This is Eclipse, which is a Java development integrated development environment with Android developer tools as a plugin. And so this works really well. If you're used to Eclipse, you may want to choose this version, but in this course, we're going to be using Android Studio. This is still in an early access beta, but it is very stable. It works very well. Android Studio, rather than being based on Eclipse, is based on another Java IDE called IntelliJ IDEA. And we'll be using this, as I already said, throughout this course. But whether you choose the Eclipse version or the ADT bundle or the Android Studio, the development process is essentially the same. And really they look quite a bit the same. Because the Android pieces, the plug-in pieces of that, are really essentially the same. We have an emulator which allows us to see what our running code is going to look like on the device. We have a debugging bridge which has things like logcat, and so that we can see our logs as we go. So really, and Java, of course, is the same. So really, they're the same. And so even though we're using the Android Studio, if you choose to use the Eclipse bundle, go ahead and do that. And all of your project work, the essential project work, will be essentially identical. So how do we install this? Well, first, we download and install the latest version of the JDK for your operating system. And then we're going to download and install Android Studio, or the ADT bundle with Eclipse. And then upon first launching the app, we need to select Configure and then the SDK Manager. And everything I say from here on out is for the Android Studio version. Now, in order to get the SDK Manager to show up, you may need to start Android Studio more than once. This is okay, it just registers that there is an SDK there. Finally, we select the Tools folder, as well as the latest version of the SDK. And then we click Install Items. And when we see the SDK Manager in the first demo, I'll show you where this is. And then we accept the licenses and we install that particular SDK that we want. So that's the installation process, at which time you can start a new Android development project. All right, so the course consists really of 12 units, and each unit consists of discussions like this one and demos, and you will get all the source code for every demo that we show. At the end of every unit, there are assignments, programming exercises. Do all the assignments, please, because they will increase in difficulty as we progress, and later things will build on earlier concepts. I may not mention everything in the discussions and the demos. I want you to learn how to do this, and the best way to learn how to do this is by doing. And so if I assign something that I didn't cover, that's a good way to learn, because you need to look it up and assimilate the technology and then apply it. So do all of the assignments. They are an integral part of the course. Of course, we'll start with easier concepts, but this course very rapidly moves into more difficult work. So the assignments are an excellent way for you to keep up. Don't worry if it takes more than 1 or 2 weeks to finish a unit. It's perfectly okay. You need to take this at your own pace and fully understand what I'm requiring you to do. This is not a very simple course, so just take that as it is offered. So each unit. In Unit 1, we're going to talk about an Android activity, which is basically a screen that the user can interact with, and the life cycle of those activities. Unit 2, we'll talk about those activities in detail, and we'll also talk about views and controls. And to do this, we're going to have to talk about something called a design pattern, and the chief design pattern around which the entire Android kind of mentality is based is the model view controller design pattern. So we'll cover that in quite a lot of detail. Unit 3, we'll talk about controls in some detail. Writing callback methods for active controls. What is an active and passive control? We'll talk about using the various XML files that are packaged with Android and how to get your controls to talk with them. And then we'll talk about creating controls in code. The usual way is to drag and drop controls onto the IDE screen for doing this, but we can also create controls directly in code and manage them with callbacks there. Unit 4 is all about list views and list activities. These present a list of information that we get from some sort of data source. We can get it from an XML file. We can get it from a Java generic. We're going to talk about Java generics and how to populate list controls with them in this particular unit. And then we'll talk about responding to user taps on an item in a list by presenting a new activity perhaps. And in order to do that, we'll have to talk about the glue which holds these activities together in Android, and those are called intents. Unit 5 is about SQL, structured query language. We can use structured query language, or SQL, in a version called SQLite databases and integrate them with Android apps. In particular, we're going to talk about populating list views and list activities with the data from an SQL database. Unit 6 goes into those glue intents in detail, and there are other activity-like things in Android that do different things called services and content providers and broadcasts. So we'll talk about intents and how to use them with these 3 extremely important parts of the Android development environment. Unit 7 is all about audio and video. And what more can I say about that? It's a very important thing in mobile app development, and we'll talk about playing and recording audio and video in Unit 7. Unit 8 is animation. And these are simple techniques, things called view and property animation. View animation and property animation can both be used to animate views, meaning controls or any image that we put there, but property animation can actually animate a property of any object over time, which turns out to be very useful in some applications. Unit 9, we'll talk about location services, finding out where the device is located on the Earth, using GPS and the IP of the device and or the cell tower location. So we'll talk about the various forms that can take. And we'll also talk about things like the accelerometer and gyrometer and heat sensors and other things that are available in the hardware that we can access to get information about the device's environment and what's going on. Unit 10, we'll talk a little bit as an introduction to OpenGLES. And OpenGLES is OpenGL for embedded systems. And this is the 3D coding environment for Android mobile devices. Unit 11 goes into some best practices for developing your apps and preparing to market them as well. And Unit 12, finally, will talk about some debugging strategies and also publishing your app on the Google Play Store. So as you can see, we've got a lot of information to cover. Take your time, understand it all. If you have any questions, be sure to ask them through our portal, and have fun. Thank you very much.